But my main motivation was helping out the community, running good events, and basically just giving back to the game that I love. And that's it. So I will be presenting today on creating a welcoming play environment, which you can probably figure out why I chose this topic, because it's what I want to do as a judge. I'm good to start. Hello, everyone watching me later. That's me. So now I'm going to ask you the exact same question you just answered. Why do you play Magic? Full stop.
I really like winning.
Yeah, okay. I know you do. Anyone else?
It's a very social thing.
Cool.
I like collecting cards.
Okay, cool. Anyone else?
Puzzle solving.
Puzzle solving? Cool. So there's definitely a competitive element to it, but also it's fun, social, and that's really more the aspect of Magic I'm going to be focusing on today is the social side of things. The exact same question you just answered. I know the answer to this. A lot of you said we got efficient tournaments from me, but we got a lot of wanting to give back to the community, not really a judge in my area, someone to look up to in my area who can answer questions about rules. Thank you for joining us. So I'm going to throw to another question to you. What do you guys think the 5 key characteristics of being a judge are? And I'm going to write them up.
Respect. Good customer service.
Respect. So customer service.
Say expertise or knowledge.
Knowledge and expertise. Sorry about my handwriting. Anything else? So we can get to 5 of them.
I want to say neutrality.
Neutrality? It's a pretty good one.
Reliability.
It's a good one. It's a real good one. Cool. Let's. Does anybody disagree with any of those? Anybody want to add anything? No. Cool.
I think leadership.
Leadership's a good one. Let's throw that up there. Now, this question.
I did have a question. Why respect?
Why respect? Players should respect your position as a judge. You don't.
And vice versa.
Well, it's a position of authority.
Sure.
You don't agree with that?
Not really. I don't think it's a key quality of being a judge. Like
Respect? Question
is-
mark.
I think it's not only that, like, it's not so much that a judge should be above others. Like, he represents a higher thing in the community, but at the same time, judges should also be respecting the player base and respecting the store owners that you work with and everything, and respecting other judges as well. You're all still on the same level, but you've got to, if you ever want someone to look at you a certain way, you've got to try and be in the same level with other people.
Yeah, so respect versus authority, maybe.
If you want players to respect one another and to respect you, you've got to first show that respect to them. Be an example.
There we are. I'll actually get into that in a little bit. Who knows what one of the most significant changes in penalties and philosophies was, and it happened in 2014. It was a very well publicized to the point where I'll throw you the hint that Forbes wrote an article about this.
What sets were around that?
I came in at 20.
Khan's block.
There we are. Yeah. Start of Khan's block.
Wasn't it Theros?
Theros.
Maybe
Was it
Theros?
Theros block in
Yeah.
2013?
Theros 2014 was Pro Tour Theros was 2014.
Isn't that such a Magic player thing? What was happening in my life in this year? Well, what set came out?
Is it Mistrigger?
Nope.
No.
Before the Forbes thing, I would have said hidden card.
Yeah. After the Forbes thing?
I have no idea about Forbes at all.
Okay. So Forbes,
any idea about
Forbes is a pseudo-financial publication, so it's very much not a nerd publication. So this was actually the big change to what constitutes unsporting conduct and the new community rules that came out. There was something else that came out at the same time. Really, really important for us judges. Anybody know what it was?
The judge conduct?
Close. It's the judge code.
Yeah, the judge.
Now, this doesn't bode well for the next question. Who knows the 5 aspects of the judge code?
Not a clue.
Google does.
Google does. All right. They are service, integrity, community, respect, and trustworthiness. That's a really horrible order to present them in because you'll never remember it. So I remember it like this. Crits. Community, respect, integrity, trustworthiness, and service. So these are the five characteristics we as judges should be promoting according to the Judge Code. So this gets into, next slide please. That's weird, it's showing me a different thing. So who knows what a welcoming play environment is? What entails a welcoming play environment?
Inclusivity.
Yep. Even more simple than that.
A place where everyone can come to play at any level,
Yep.
play with whoever they want at any time, and always feel like they've had fun.
Yep.
They're welcome, and that nothing else really is being judged as well.
That's almost exactly as it's written on the Wizards website. So that's about it. It's a place where everyone can feel welcome to play at any time. So who knows about the community commitment to each other? A few stores may be showing this on a poster lately.
Poster was this big
There was-
away in the door.
Yeah. Who can name the 4 things on it?
Just give me a second.
Okay, cool. So along with the Judge Code, there's the community version of the Judge Code, which is our commitment to each other. So it's 4-part. We put fun first. It's a game. We welcome everyone. We respect our play environment. And we follow the rules. So fairly simple, not very complex, like quite high level rules, but they're good rules of thumb for just creating an environment where everyone is going to feel welcome to play the game. Who here thinks they have a welcoming LGS? Johnny knows my answer from the last time. Okay, so who here thinks most of the people who come into your LGS would feel comfortable playing in an event there? Who here thinks all of the people who come into your LGS feel comfortable playing in an event there?
Definitely not.
All right, I'm going to throw some figures at you. So there's a huge number of players who never ever play in a store. Partially because they're not interested in it, but also in part because a lot feel that the store environment is intimidating. Magic, especially prior to about 2014, when Wizards started really pushing for it, had a really bad public image, especially the community. So a couple of headline figures. So this is based on some estimations based on the Wizards, the Hasbro quarterly reports. So Echo MTG puts this out every year. There's about a million DCI players with the registered DCI number. There's about 21 million Magic players, which means the average player doesn't play in the store. In fact, what's that? 5% of players play in store. And then some further figures on that. Maro puts it at 12 million active players, with a much lower percentage of female players. When was that? November 2017. And he notes this point, not because they are uncompetitive, but because the play environment is unwelcoming. And Wizards does a lot of customer surveys on this. Unfortunately, they don't make all the details of those public, but we should believe them when they're saying that a lot of people are not finding play environments very welcoming. And a little bit of back of the envelope math on my behalf here. So obviously environment isn't the only reason why people aren't playing. Some people just don't want to play. That's play in a store, that's fine. But some 92 to 95% of the players doesn't play in a store. So if 8% of those players started playing in stores regularly, the average tournament in a store should double in size. That's not a very big number, 8% more. So it's reasonable to assume that if we're creating a more welcoming environment and we can bring in an extra couple of percentage of the players, it's reasonable to assume that numbers in store will definitely increase. Why do we think a welcoming play environment matters in general?
Because it means the game can survive long term as well.
Yeah, more players, more money.
I mean, the money's not the biggest part of it, but yeah. So we play for Magic for fun. So the place we play Magic in should be fun, right? That double tap is annoying me. We play Magic to socialise. So we should be comfortable socialising in the environment we play Magic in. We do also play Magic to win. So, I mean, there should be tournaments to win, right? So simply, just feeling welcome in the LGS makes it much easier to enjoy the hobby in general. Excuse me. And exactly the point we had before. More people feeling welcome in the store means larger events. Larger events mean more magic. Means more magic. And at a very baseline level for store, bigger community, more money in the door. More money in the door means bigger events, more stores, and better events for everyone. So basically, it's just a win-win to grow the player base. And this, to me, seems like a no-brainer for growing the in-store player base. Is just making those environments a bit more welcoming to play in. And if you're not convinced by those points, it's kind of in the agreement that you are a WPN store, that you're a welcoming play environment. So as much as growing the store, growing the community is should be our primary motivation here. It's also something that we have to do. Why does it matter to us as judges?
Judges in Brisbane get paid per player that comes along.
I mean, I didn't include that, but that's a really good point. Anything else? More so than the average player. Why do we care?
And without players, there would be judges, right?
Yeah.
Makes it very easy to judge. Very easy.
Yeah.
Everyone gets along and makes it much simpler.
Yeah. We'll get onto that in a little bit when I go over the penalties real quick. So it's actually in the Judge Code. A lot of this is just in the Judge Code. So judges hold special positions of trust and authority within the community. We enforce the rules, award penalties, and even disqualify players. Appropriately, the community expects judges to act in ways which demonstrate worthiness of that position and authority. And that is going to be leading into, as we were talking briefly before, respect point. So simply by being judges, the community looks to us as a figure of authority, and as such, players will often look to us as leaders. When something goes wrong in store, what do players do?
Judge.
Yeah, they throw their hand up and yell judge. Partially because they're conditioned to do it, and partially because we can solve those problems for them. Players tend to follow our example. So I had a good example of this and I completely forgot it. So when you are making setting the pace of conversation in a store, players will often gather around the judge, because that's the figure they know in the store, especially if you've gone to a store that you've never been to before, and you're like, oh, that's the judge I know who ran the last PTQ. And this is part of the socialization part of Magic. People just naturally gravitate towards the group they know. Also, the more competitive players will always hang around the judge to get sort of an idea of how many rounds it's going to be, what prizes might be, things like that, because we tend to know a little bit more information than the average player, just simply by needing it to run the tournament. So from that, we're seen to be in control of events, because we are. And we have an inherent responsibility to the community. People recognise that we are giving up our time to be judges, so or we've volunteered for this position, so we've volunteered to be that leader and that figure within the community. And if that's not enough, it's in the Judge Code. So this is an enormous chunk of text. I'm going to break it down into pieces. And it goes into 4 nice general points. So firstly, judges have the same responsibility as the members of the Magic community to avoid actions which would reasonably be expected to cause someone to feel harassed, threatened, bullied, or stalked. Everyone should be welcoming. That's a bit of a no-brainer. We should all just be nice to each other, like not just at Magic events, just full stop. They have an additional responsibility to act positively and create environments where these behaviours are not accepted and the members of the Magic community can feel welcome. So we have a little bit of, we have a responsibility here to be the solution to potential problems within our within our LGS and within our community. Judges should not allow others to create a bad environment by inaction. We shouldn't ignore the problem. Judges should not express views that would make other members of the Magic community feel unsafe or unwilling to attend an event where that judge is on staff. Judges shouldn't be the problem. That's a bit of a reiteration of the first one, but really, really important that we're not seen as the problem. The worst thing that you can hear is, oh, I didn't want to go to this PPTQ because blah, blah, blah was judging it. And just a reminder that in general, we should just be trying to hold ourselves to a higher standard than we hold players, but just because it's part of what comes with taking on this position of authority that we've volunteered for. So what can we do? Part by part. Everyone should be welcoming. That's the same point from just before. First thing you can do is just keep an eye out for your fellow players. There's a whole bunch of players out there who may be feeling bullied or harassed, and you can not notice it by trying to pay attention to what's happening in the room, not just burying your head in your game or your commander game in the corner, and getting an idea of this is more so if you've chosen to judge, is a good way to keep an eye out for potentially negative patterns that start picking up in stores. Talk to your players and talk to your TO. If you are having concerns about a set of behaviour from a player or something like that, talk to the TO, talk to other players to get an idea of, say, there's 2 friends who are sort of ribbing on each other. Grab a second to be like, hey, are you okay with this level of banter? Because sometimes people won't be, and you've just accepted that, oh, they must know each other from outside of Magic, but it might just be 2 Magic players who one of them has kind of overstepped a boundary and they're just attacking each other. Be conscious of the people who won't speak up for themselves. So, playing into my last one, sometimes people won't say anything because they just feel too embarrassed to, or they're too intimidated by the environment to. You never know what someone's personal situation is, so just be conscious of the people who react negatively to comments that might be said in the store, and those comments that might cause that negative reaction. Being the solution. First one's first. Try and greet everyone. This is like not even to stamp out negative behaviours, but in doing my research for this, I actually read this article. It's called Beyond Your First Tournament. It's on the Wizards website. It's the introduction to Magic for people who were coming from Jewels of the Planeswalkers into coming and playing their first FNM. Reading it, I was like, wow. Magic Store is actually a really, really intimidating environment. You don't know how to report a score. You get pairings yelled at you at the start of the tournament, and you're kind of just expected to know where to go. If it's a limited event, it's sort of expected that you can build a deck and you know exactly what's going on there. And yes, there is an expectation from the player that they've done a little bit of research on that, but they might not be confident that the research they've done or the reading that they've done on it is correct. So just by saying, hey, I haven't seen you before, I'm Adrian or I'm John, is a good way of just, I know Johnny's excellent at this. He greets everyone who comes through the door, knows them all by first name. And that is just the best way to start an event, is walking through the door and being greeted and being acknowledged, because it removes any of that potential anxiety that might be just sitting around about what can be an intimidating environment for newer players. Try to be approachable and impartial. Yes, we tend to section ourselves off into cliques quite quickly. You need to make sure that that's not buffering people away from you, that they don't feel intimidated to come speak to you because you're part of, say, the cool crew at your LGS. Put any other differences you might have aside. This one's a no-brainer. If you just don't like someone, that's fine, kind of. But that shouldn't factor into how you judge at all. You should just accept, hey, I may not particularly like playing against this person. I don't like that this person always plays blah 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 deck and I don't like it. I don't like this person's sense of humor. Doesn't matter. You should still treat that person with the same respect and integrity you would any other player in the tournament. And just generally being a pillar of the community. So most of the judges in Brisbane, if not all, are pretty good for this. Like, you go into a store and you know who the judges are, and they're generally well known, well respected, and you can talk to them and you know who is who. It's sort of our responsibility is putting ourselves out there as someone who people feel comfortable to approach, makes these situations feel less confrontational and feel less awkward for those who might be having problems in stores. What can we not do? Don't be the problem. First one's first. Don't lead negative conversation topics. So, say a player has a problem with, hey, I lost to KCI for the 16th time, and it's like, I fucking hate the guy who plays KCI. You should nip that conversation right in the bud. You shouldn't go, hey, yeah, I really hate it as well. I hate that they react like this and things like that. Conversations like that foster an environment where it's okay to bitch about other players. And we're all bad at this, I think. I'm bad at this. Cutting slurs out of your vocabulary. This isn't just a magic rule, it's just stop it. Especially from judges, like, this is the kind of stuff that makes people really, really uncomfortable and makes people literally never come back to a store ever again. And that's bad, not just for us as judges, but that's bad for the store as well. And stores should be really, really conscious of this one. Don't be the bad guy in someone else's bad beats story. Yeah, it sucks losing at Magic, but don't be the guy who overreact. Yes, sometimes games go poorly, and yes, you have a right to feel negative emotions about that, but don't be the person who takes that over the top, because there's a lot of those players around, and those players are a big part of these negative play environments. And I'll get to an example that I have towards the end of this. Not ignoring the problem. This one's pretty easy. just call people out on their negative conversation topics. So if someone's having an off-color conversation, one I interrupted the other day was two players were in, they were like first players in store, and they were just having a chat with each other about Tinder, and one of them made the comment, oh, people are so easy on Tinder. And it's just like, man, just stop. Just stop that conversation right there, because that's already going to create an environment where people are going to start talking about a topic that other players may not be comfortable talking about. Just, you don't need to police every conversation in the store, of course, but you do need to be conscious of the conversations that might be having, that might be excluding people, and might even be making people feel uncomfortable. Try and steer those conversations. If a bad speech story, like I was saying before, starts being like, oh, I hate the guy who plays that deck, steer it away. Just be like, no, he's fine. I hate this about the deck. Something like that. It's no longer a problem with the player. It's not hostile towards other players. It's now yeah, doesn't it suck that they haven't wised up and banned ancient stirrings, finally, please.
Is that Clue?
Yes, dear God, ban that card. Hello, internet, please ban that card. Someone put a sign out the front of the office. And just generally keep an eye out, right? We have this responsibility to not ignore the problem. It's in our code of conduct. So if it's happening, we shouldn't turn a blind eye to it. And the level at which we do that, you know, we're not jumping around to every person's conversation and being like, don't you dare talk about anything slightly off color. What we're doing is being like, hey, there is a large group being loud in the corner there, very actively talking about something that would make people feel uncomfortable. Let's maybe nip that in the bud, steer the conversation away, and maybe educate those players on, like, maybe that's not a conversation you want to be having in a public place. When to speak up. Basically, if you see something, you should say something. It's really, really easy to just say, hey, shouldn't be talking about that. Or, hey, shouldn't behave like that. Sometimes. But I'll get on to how to do that. According to the procedure guide, the infraction procedure guide for unsupported conduct, trying to play things off as just a joke doesn't pass, and that should be a rule in general. If you say something that's very much off colour, it's not a valid defence that it's just a joke, because those words still have meaning. Again, remember, not everyone is going to say something. A lot of people just quit playing Magic if they feel uncomfortable. And I've got some actual examples of that at the end of this. Also, stores aren't of the rules. In fact, they're a little bit more beholden to the rules than us as judges. Some of you might know about this example. So that's community guidelines from before that have been slightly edited by a store. That store lost its certification over this, simply because this is something we've agreed to. We as judges are volunteers in a program that has this code of conduct. The store has entered a business relationship with a business that has this in their rules. Not much there. So having the talk, or telling people to stop being bad people. So just casually driving the conversation. So someone says, hey, that card is retarded. You'd be like, nope, don't use that word. That card's shit. It's fine, doesn't offend anyone, just swear. It's much better than, like, you can say something that might offend someone personally, or you can say something that is generally offensive, that with no target. Why not just go for the generally offensive one that's not going to offend someone personally? Hey, ease up on another player, guys, is a good way to shift away from that topic I was mentioning before, it's be like, hey, I don't like this person who plays this way. And it's like, hey, ease up. They might have their own reason for playing that kind of deck, or might have their own reason for being that kind of person. Just yelling language at people from across the store works a lot as well.
Sorry.
Like sometimes, and like a lot of the time, people will just get caught up in their conversation. And you got to recognize that whilst I say you're better off swearing than using a slur, you're also not better off swearing in all environments. Most Magic environments are an all ages environment. So just try and watch sort of your general tone. Just try and keep every conversation family friendly. And of course, I'm not trying to say you can't have your own conversations and your own social interactions. Just be conscious of who might be around, and be conscious of other people who might be having a conversation that might negatively influence other people's environment. A really, really important part of this is picking a time and place. You don't need to jump on it immediately. You can come to it a little bit later and be like, hey, like, say you've got someone who is always swearing in the store and always carrying on. Just pull them aside at the end of a tournament, or like when you grab them, be like, hey, you know, I notice you swear quite a lot when you play. It's all right to get animated. It's all right to get caught up in the game, but let's try and keep that language down. It is supposed to be a family-friendly environment. This is often something that a store will do. So if you're noticing this behaviour, have a talk to your TO at the store, and if they're not comfortable having that conversation, you can have that conversation, or discuss with them whether they want you to have that conversation. This can also go with like, hey, an example recently, I actually had to pull one of our long-time players aside and be like, you really need to stop overreacting to certain gameplay situations, because it's making people not want to play against you. And I had an example where I paired up around, and the person's like, my opponent wins 2-0 and went and got food rather than playing his match. That is not a welcome play environment. That kind of behaviour we need to keep an eye out for, and we need to nip that in the bud way before it gets to the point where someone is scooping around rather than playing against another player. Just have a follow-up talk if you need. If you're say you use, hey, let's use a different word, and the player when they think they're out of earshot with you later, use that word again. You're more than fine to be like, hey, look, there's a reason why I said this. Let's not make an environment where people don't feel welcome. You don't know everything about everyone in the store, and it's better to not offend. Talk to the other judges, especially if you're noticing negative patterns of behaviour, because they can start to keep an eye out on those players at other events, and that can maybe let a player know that, hey, wait, maybe I'm behaving negatively here, and this is not something that's welcome in the Magic community as a whole. Goodbye, pen. Yeah, so in the commitment to other and to each other, which is where the community commitment from earlier on was first posted, if you do say something, please do so in a constructive way. Don't just be like, don't say that. Be like, you can say don't say that in the moment, but then you want to have that follow-up talk and be like, hey, it's not a word we should be using. Obviously, sometimes these can just be lapses in judgment. Like I said, you can get heated in a game, heated in a conversation about a card or an interaction. It happens. Again, you're not attacking the people who make the mistake. This is a chance to educate and to change how our community as a whole welcomes other people in, and presents itself as an environment to other players. Now, the much more serious talk. Unsporting conduct. I won't go into this too much, but the basic philosophy of this is that a safe environment is a basic expectation of any tournament attendee. Harassment undermines the safety and integrity of a tournament. Players who purposefully create a harmful or unwelcoming situations at an event are expected to immediately correct the behaviour and demonstrate remorse or be removed. Obviously, it's a very confrontational infraction. I would advise you just read over the infraction because this is a lot for me to say out. But the point of the application of this is you don't want to be making the problem worse. So if someone says something because they're already heated in a game, the first thing you should be doing is trying to separate those players, be like, yo, chill out a little bit before you start having this conversation. Otherwise, you're likely to get an explosion back at you. It's really, really hard to do this. It can be difficult to do without causing a scene. It can be really difficult to do in a busy tournament where you're the only judge on. And usually you aren't aware of it until it's gone too far and someone's called you over, or you've heard about it afterwards. This is where, like Barney said, making a welcoming environment in the first place makes our life easier. No one ever wants to deal with this situation. It is, in my opinion, the worst infraction to give. Cheaters know they're cheating, and they tend to just accept that and leave once they've been caught. A lot of the time, people don't understand what they've done that's made such a negative environment. And it's a process of education, and the reaction to that is always going to be different from person to person. The blog for Magic Judges has a really, really, really good article on conflict resolution. It's an L3 quality, but I think all players, all judges should read this. It's a really, really good 5-step program of like how you can approach different conflicts and the different reactions you can expect to see. I will make a version of these slides available so you don't have to write that whole URL down, by the way. Part 2 of the much more serious talk. Officials must investigate these matters as soon as they are brought to their attention. If they determine that an infraction does not meet the criteria for unsporting conduct major, it's still recommended that players be talked to avoid future misunderstandings. Now, of course, there is a bit of our own judgment here. Like I said, this is a point of education. So if at the first time someone says something off colour, and the opponent's like, whoa, no, not okay, judge, you come over and you pull the players aside and be like, hey, look, I understand you used this word in playing your game. I understand it gets heated sometimes, but would you please not use that word? If the player's like, oh, shit, sorry, I know I shouldn't say that word, I'm really sorry, they're probably fine just to sit down. They've been educated, they've been reminded, they know it's wrong. But if the player says it again, then yeah, it's definitely unsporting conduct because they're usually doing it intentionally at that point. So also, brushing it off isn't an option. It often makes things worse in the long run. Even if nothing happens in that tournament, again, player could quit due to your complete and utter inaction. Say they come to you and be like, oh, I really didn't like the way my opponent was talking to me during that match. You should go talk to that other player. Even if it's just to, hey, I understand you got a little bit heated in that match, just remember it's just a game. It can get difficult when you're approaching like round 9 of a winning into something that people win. I don't know, I never win tournaments, so don't know what prizes are these days. So it gets harder the more stressful the tournament gets, but you really, really should act on everything that you hear that may make someone feel unwelcome. And this isn't just, hey, this person's saying these slurs. It's, hey, I'm not comfortable playing against this person because of how emotional they get during the game. You need to make it so that those environments don't come to be. So someone feeling offended isn't the point where we step in. The problem we're trying to address is the environment we play in. It is our responsibility to help foster an environment where it doesn't even get to the point where people are made to feel uncomfortable. This is a really, really important part of how this infraction is acted upon. Is someone doesn't have to say, I am offended by this. If you hear something that could be reasonably considered to be offensive, you should act on that. You must act on that. Reaction. So player must correct the behaviour immediately. If the offence was committed to malicious intent, you can see I copy pasted this out of somewhere because that's a link. The player displays no remorse, or the offence is repeated at a later time, the penalty is upgraded to disqualification and removal from the venue. Again, if that person we pulled aside before says something like, yeah, well, he was a fucking whatever, it said, you're like, yeah, cool, you're out of the tournament. Like, it's pretty simple to figure out what we're going for here. We're trying to educate these players on creating an environment where other players don't feel comfortable, because everyone has an equal right to enjoy that tournament or that play environment. There's not much more logic beyond that. So keep an ear out as well after you've had this initial talk, because remember, those players may not understand why what they said is a problem. It can be a really, really tricky and contentious topic. Just Google the word offence and spend 6 years reading articles. There are very, very strong opinions on both sides of the debate here. Simply, we have a duty to create a welcoming play environment. It's in our code of conduct, it's in the store's code of conduct. We should just do it, even if it's not, even if you don't believe it's the right thing. Again, remember on our point of you can't create a welcoming environment through inaction. If the offence occurs at the end of a match, it is acceptable to apply it to the next match instead. So between rounds, if someone's like, I played against blah, they were a blah, and you're like, whoa, not okay. And they're like, yeah, but they were a blah. You'll be like, cool, you're getting that penalty in the next round. And I'm just going to go over a couple of examples after all that fun penalty stuff. These are actual examples. So by virtue of playing this game for 22 years, I've run across a lot of different Magic players. And a lot of them don't play Magic anymore. So I actually flicked a whole bunch of people messages being like, hey, why don't you play anymore? Was it something about the environment? And these are some of the responses I got about environments. And there's one actually from last week that I threw in here as well. So one female player sits down to play a match, and their opponent looks up at them and smiles and says, here's your boyfriend. What's the problem here?
It's not relevant to the match at all.
It's also the assumption that the only reason a female player would be there is if they're with someone.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's basically saying to you, I don't believe you're actually a Magic player. I don't believe you actually enjoy this hobby. I believe you are just here because someone dragged you here. This is super not okay. How would you talk to this player afterwards? Both players.
Probably explain to them what we just went through just then, and I would have a small chat with the female player saying that, sorry this happened. Really hope you come back because this won't be a problem anymore.
Yeah, cool.
I'd also ask them a very awkward question of, why does she have to be here with someone else? And see what answer they give. That's always great fun.
Yeah, so approaching the opponent here and being like, hey, look, why did your opponent have to be with someone else? Or just saying, hey, look, just try not to make that assumption at the start of a match. When you sit down to play an opponent, You don't need to make any assumptions about them. Sometimes that can, make them feel uncomfortable and different in the space. The female player, you don't necessarily need to talk to here about this incident. What you would probably try and do is make sure that they don't feel excluded or feel like they're different. My easiest way to, if someone looks like they're feeling like they're not involved in the social part of the game, like sitting around between rounds, just ask them what their last matchup was, ask how it went, ask if they lost, ask, hey, did you miss sideboard or did you draw bad? Just ask them normal Magic player questions because they're a normal Magic player. This one actually happens a lot and we miss it a lot. So a new player comes to a Modern tournament, doesn't know many cards outside of Standard. Their opponent gets increasingly frustrated at having to explain their cards. Say you're walking past and you sort of start hearing this interaction. What do you do?
Remind them that they were also new ones. And they didn't know all the cards.
Yep.
Yeah.
What else?
Try and encourage them in future to be a little bit more patient, understand that this
Cool.
scenario happens every now and then.
The new player one? What would you say to the new player?
If they're encountering new interactions and things they haven't seen before, offer your assistance as a judge.
There we are. We should be like, hey,
Job description.
simplest way to say this is like, hey, I know Modern's a pretty complicated format. You've got questions about anything, just throw your hand up, call the judge. You can double check how anything works. We're more than happy to do that. In fact, that's what we're here for. If I'm just staff at the store for that event, I will say I'm literally being paid to answer these questions, so please ask them. The other thing I would be doing is keeping an eye on that experienced player over the long run and seeing if this keeps happening, because that changes from a negative play experience to a negative play environment, where players, the more experienced players might be being like, I'm sick of these noobs who don't know these cards. That is not an environment you want to foster for the game.
I was just going to say, Adrian, for the previous point there, I actually had an example from last night at FNM. There's a new player, they came with their burn deck, obviously had a lot of standard cards in it.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, because I'm, a judge playing the event, I found the most helpful thing I could do was just, not in a condescending manner, just explain everything I'm doing. So I was saying like, I'm going to cast a Planeswalker. Have you seen this guy before? Have you seen this guy before? And they go, no. Okay, here's some abilities, and just like sort of outward explain everything and let my opponent know their decision through the process. Like my opponent was playing some cards that he didn't know could hit Planeswalkers, and I'm like, did you know that you could do this? And they go, I didn't know that. Okay, would you like to do that? Give them every opportunity to learn throughout the game, but not in a condescending manner.
Yep.
So that way you're sort of like not only promoting a welcoming play environment, but you're educating along the way.
I'm actually going to, the gold star here, and I'm sorry this is going to create paperwork because you're going to have to chase down, make sure I can say someone's name. Greg Davies is the best at this of any Magic player I've ever seen. He explains everything that's happening. Once he's played it once, he'll be like, that's the same as the one I played before. Would you like me to show you it again? Especially with Tron, because it has lands that look different, which are functionally the same. He is spectacular with new players. And I always say a little prayer for when it actually pairs Greg Davies and the new player for me, because I'm just like, good. They get a good reaction, good encounter in their first or whatever game it is. Here's another one. And this one's actually come up a few times in Brisbane. It's not the player everyone's immediately going to think of. A player has a deck mostly in a foreign language with lots of interactions. The opponent says to them, and this is a literal quote from my Thursday night, is, I can't read any of these fucking cards anyway. What's wrong? Anyone?
It's an exclusionary of a language.
Mm-hmm.
It's being dismissive of the whole game.
Yep. So we're allowed to play cards in whatever language we want. Like, Magic is a international game. Does this scenario change if all the cards were in this player's native language?
I'd be more concerned that they can't read it then.
Other way around. The player with the deck not in English.
It still promotes a bit of a confusing state, but I think like as anyone who's purposely playing cards or just in any general sense, anyone who plays a deck should. Obviously there are exceptions, but if you're playing in a foreign language, you generally try and explain each and every card. You've got the judge there, you can ask at any time, like, hey, can you help look up this card for me? I don't exactly know what this reads, does it word exactly like they're saying? From the perspective of the player who's playing the foreign language, it should be something that he should try and encourage, or as the judge, try and encourage the player whose deck it is to try and explain it. There's no fault in overly communicating.
Yeah, and you've actually touched on a really good point in here. Who here is being made to feel unwelcome?
Person with the foreign deck.
Yeah. No, wait, sorry. Incorrect. Both players feel super unwelcome. The player who can't read the cards is like, what is the point? I don't know what my opponent is doing. And playing with the foreign deck is like, I'm just trying to play with my cards. So here is an example where you absolutely should be stepping in if you can, and if you catch this interaction. If this is regular, talk to the player with the deck not fully in English and be like, hey, if you need to call me for Oracle texts or pull up Gatherer on your phone, just so that your opponent can see the text in English, as long as it's actual Gatherer. Maybe talk to the opponents and be like, hey, look, your opponent's playing a deck that's not in English. You can call me for Oracle text at any time during the game. You don't need to do that at the beginning of every round. Just sort of judge it on who the opponents are. Of course, this isn't feasible at larger events. At larger events, you're going to have a chat to both of these players. Maybe the player who has the deck not in English should be like, hey, just let us know if your opponent is having any issues with reading your deck. Just call me over and I can have a chat to them. The opponent here, you should always be, firstly, you don't need to react that over the top to it. Secondly, you can play cards in any language. I understand it's a bit difficult, but that's what we're here as judges for.
With that though, you should not be encouraging players to just believe the
Yes.
opponent's translations of the cards.
Yeah, absolutely. So there, you would be trying to get trying to get them to call you when there's a problem, but often at regular they'll happily sort things out themselves. But there you would want to say something to the opponent like, if anything sounds off, just call me over. It's a tricky one to judge, right? Because you don't want to stand there for the entire match, every round, translating every single card for these players. But at the same time, you need to make sure that both players feel like they're welcome there. You also can't stand over the player playing the foreign deck, stand over their shoulder and be like, I have to give you special consideration because of this deck you chose to bring to this tournament. That is also quite an unwelcoming environment. Finally, and this one was the most depressing one to hear because the person was a really good player. A player comes to a pre-release alone. After the round, their opponent asks to see their deck. The player then obliges, being friendly, just hands over their deck. The opponent proceeds to grab the cards not in their deck, so their sideboard, and attempt to rebuild their sealed pool for them. Their friends gather around, and after some flicking through the cards, the opponent hands your deck back over and says, actually, you did a pretty good job. What's wrong here?
Well, firstly, a total assumption that like the player who comes pre-release alone is just total noob, doesn't know what they're doing. There's no respect
Exactly.
to them as a player.
Mm-hmm.
It's just babying them in a way that is not appropriate. So if you were to do something like, I've seen this happen before.
Everyone's seen this at every pre-release.
I think there's a right way to assist people. It's not to just do it. It's to ask permission.
Yep.
And then to to guide them, not to show them if they don't want it. Because some people just want to go it alone, and they're allowed to. They're allowed to do that if they want.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, who want guidance, they may not be like, oh, hey, can you build my pool for me?
Yep.
It's up to you to be proactive and be, hey, this is your first pre-release. So it's like, oh, I've seen your deck, you had some good cards. There are some that I wasn't quite sure on. Why did you include cards like this?
Yep.
Ask. And you say, hey, would you be open to, me just looking through and we can try and rebuild it together? I think you could, this is a really good start. Do you want some help improving it? And most people will be like, yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah,
I haven't found anyone that says like, no, I don't want any help.
The assumption with all of that is that this player lost. Well,
It's after the round, the information's not given, but it shouldn't matter either way, I feel.
I understand.
So in this
but
example,
if the player actually beats you and you look at their deck,
It's even worse, right? At least I think it is.
assumedly,
okay, you hit on my really, really secret Easter egg in this question.
I'm sorry.
This player at the time, no, it's really good. I was hoping someone would mention this. Sorry, I'm standing behind the mic. This player at the time had just won that round to be 3-0 in the pre-release, but was female. And the opponent made, obviously, the assumption that you have no idea what you're doing. The player won the next round and was undefeated in the pre-release. So, yeah, they've done a pretty good job. Yeah, they're a good Magic player. The opponent there was not being the nicest. So, a really good way to approach this, and this is the opponent, be like, hey, I understand you're trying to be helpful here, because they probably are. There's probably not an ill intent here, right? I understand you're trying to be helpful, but just make sure your opponent is looking for advice there. And you could have a little conversation, like Brandon's point there is like, just change how you approach this. A really nice one I like to ask is, whilst I'm playing, if I think my opponent plays a card that I think is thoroughly unplayable in that format, I ask them how that card is working out for them. And if they say it's terrible, it'll be like, so there wasn't anything better in your pool. Or if they say it's great, you'd be like, cool, you play your game and I'll stay in my lane. It's quite a simple one there. So you'll notice something about all of these. None of these examples are people using slurs, people swearing at each other, people clocking each other in the face, which is my favorite question from another TCG's judge exam, is what to do when someone punches someone else. You're disqualified.
More on that later.
Yeah, that was the easiest question I've ever been asked. But these are all super typical environments. Like, as I asked each of these, I saw a fair number of nods around here, but all of these can contribute to a negative play environment, because all of these players don't feel happy after this. Like, this player has been assumed that you're not a real Magic player. This player has just been thoroughly embarrassed by the opponent being like, oh, actually you did all right. The opponent who lost the match. Statistics show that the opponent's the worst player. Here, a player's not feeling comfortable playing cards in their own language. That's a big problem. And here is just, this might be this player's first ever tournament in store. Do you think they're ever going to come back if no one acts on that situation? No, they're just going to be like, cool, this half-built modern deck, I'll just sell the modern cards for it, stick to standard. And 3 rotations out, I'll quit the game. Because they just think modern isn't a welcome place for them. And that gets worse and worse the deeper down you go into the formats. I think that's about it from me. Did we get Wi-Fi?
We'll ask afterwards.
Damn it, because I want my video. All right. Those of you who are my age will completely recognize what this scene is. Everyone else, you can just keep guessing. For those who don't know, it's the mid-closing scene of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. The slogan from that show is, be excellent to each other and party on, dudes. Because at the end of the day, it's a game. We're playing a game. It's a game. Don't take it too seriously, but let other people come and play this game. That's about it from me. Any questions, comments, concerns, considerations?